AC/DC hasn't made the same record over and over. They've made one great AC/DC record over and over.
I went out and got all the albums that I didn't have, and I listened to those albums incessantly, and they really were an album band.
As a kid growing up, for me, that was the biggest moment of my life, was going to the record store and going to the record bin. And, you know, I knew everything down to where they recorded the album, to what producer, you know, did the record and what label it was on. And, you know, I mean, that was the fun part about buying albums.
I believe that Atlantic Records established itself so in the new album business that people used to come in and they go, what's new on Atlantic?
It was a different culture back then. I think people, they didn't necessarily buy a lot of records, and the ones they bought, they listened to a lot.
A lot of those record clerks heard a record, liked the record, would turn a customer onto a record.
You know, you would put on the record and you would go into this journey with the band.
There was sort of a sacred oath that seemed to go on. When you bought the album, you'd sit there and look at the cover for an hour and listen to that record. There was a different absorption process.
You could put on Highway to Hell, and any song on that record sounds just like the first time you heard it. It doesn't work like that with most bands.
I mean, God, those albums are still classic. Just, you know, they play every day. I have it in my car right now. And I had it in my car before I got asked to do this interview.
The reason why bands like AC/DC and Led Zeppelin and Van Halen have these timeless recordings that sound so good 30, 35 years after they were made is because they sound essentially live.
You want to hear Angus's guitar. You want to hear Phil Rudd's groove. You know, going back to the Bon Scott songs, you know, every song, it's just like, okay, I get it. I love this.
The 5 records that they made with Bon, to me, are like, that's the Bible of rock and roll.
They've obviously gone on to be a great singles band, but for me, the Bon Scott era of the band was about the albums.
I said, don't think singles. They're not a singles band, okay? They're a band that's gonna play stadiums and play rock and roll. They got these great licks, man. It's Chuck Berry meets Little Richard meets, you know, this is great music.
Highway to Hell was a significant breakthrough for them in America. Prior to that album, they were not a big band in the U.S. They certainly had their fans, but they were not headlining arenas. Their first album wasn't even released in America initially.
Particularly in America, they were looked upon as a sort of a strange curiosity. No one really knew what to think of them. People didn't understand their musical roots.
And they were not well known at all. And I went down to the club and, you know, read their promotion, and it was $3 to get in. And I believe it was a Tuesday night, and there was probably like 75 people there.
Try and build that fan base. That was the one thing about AC/DC. They were so smart, as they played and played and played and built the fan base. They were not one-hit wonders. They were the real deal.
Of course, in the way things happened, AC/DC, the Antichrist, Devil's Children, are playing at the famous Whiskey A Go-Go, and the Knights in Satan's Service were there, Kiss, and Gene Simmons, who I love, he asked them to go on tour with them.
When, for instance, they were gonna do their first American tour with Kiss, I mean, that was a lot of money. We had to write a big check. You know, they were getting paid $100 a night to open up for Kiss. Well, who's gonna pay for their hotels and who's gonna pay for their transportation? And Atlantic and myself really came to the table, and they know we did.
They were traveling around in a station wagon with a 3-man crew when they opened for Kiss.
I had visions of when I used to play in my band, and we all used to pile in a car all cramped up and this and that. And I made a decision right then and there. I said, I'm gonna support these guys. They're out there killing themselves to make it. They're gonna make it. And we did.
Every bit of respect that they've earned along the way, they earned the hard way. Nobody gave it to them. The fact that they've become sort of a musical icon is kind of curious, because I think even if you told them that in the 70s, they wouldn't have believed it.
It's always hard in hindsight when you look at the history of a band to think, how could AC/DC be playing in bars and no one be paying attention and no one think, oh my God, these guys are gonna have the second best-selling album of all times.
It was just a matter of time and obviously the making of the right record that I knew they were gonna happen.
When Highway to Hell came in and Mutt Lange came in, one of the things that Mutt has been known for throughout his career is his work in the area of vocals. And I think that was something that was really evident on Highway to Hell. Not only was it a little glossier, I think important to note, glossier without losing the essence of AC/DC by any stretch. But even though it was a little glossier, that was the biggest thing I had noticed is in the vocals, and more specifically, the harmony and backing vocals, which got much bigger, which anybody that knows anything about production knows that's a signature of Mutt Lange.
Like a gang vocal, you know, when Mutt came in, you know, the choruses were big, and the idea was, these are about anthems. You know, the bigger the anthem, the bigger the reaction from the people, because it's almost like it engages the audience to want to sing along.
You know, you're singing along with them. You know, you may not know all the words, but like, you know enough. You can hit every second one, but you always know the chorus, and you know the repeated lines at the end. And it's just like you hear it once, and the next time you hear it, you're like, yeah, this song.
Shout along with them. I think AC/DC is probably one of the first bands that I ever heard do that.
I think what Mutt did, he took what AC/DC did live, the whole perception of how AC/DC sounded live, and he actually captured it and got it on record.
Mutt's handiwork is all over those records. You certainly hear it on Highway to Hell. You hear his production values as compared to all the records before it. It just sounds better, bigger.
This is a guy with ears that knew harmonies, that knew guitar licks.
He'll hear something in his head or in his heart or whatever, and he won't stop until he gets it. And the interesting thing was, you know, everybody says, well, who influenced you, you know, in terms of, you know, drumming or just being a musician in general? And really, it's Mutt, even though he wasn't a drummer.
You know, for me, like everything Def Leppard did years later was them, they were just trying to be AC/DC. I'm sure they would admit that, you know, if you asked them.
Well, we were fans. You know, I think if you listen to something for long enough, you're influenced by it, whether you like it or not, because it just gets into your DNA. And then it comes out. It just comes out naturally. So, yeah. And the fact that, you know, Mutt had worked with them so extensively, it's no wonder. I think every song that I hear Mutt produce, no matter what band it is, there's always sort of a hint of everything that he's done in there.
There was a nice build that started to happen, and Highway to Hell really opened up some doors for radio airplay, the hook in it, the vocal quality, the change in producer.
Things were getting better for them, and they were starting to open for Aerosmith and that sort of thing when they were over here. And then they were in Paris when that movie was filmed, and they knew, you know, they knew that it was happening.
AC/DC's goal was to always blow away their headliner when they started opening for people. And again, it goes back to playing in bars where if you weren't great by the first 35 seconds, you were probably going to get injured.
The problem is that, you know, bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Deep Purple and what have you became like this rock and roll royalty where you couldn't even touch them. And, you know, there was no access, you know, you couldn't identify with him. Like some guy sitting playing keyboards, he's got a manor somewhere in England. It's like, whatever.
If you get around to people like Yes, they got very ponderous, you know. There was a lot of that then, though. Pomp and circumstance, you know. Rick Wakeman, King Arthur on ice. On ice. That's freaking wonderful. You know, he should have sold that to Walt Disney, right?
That was the beginning of the end of really that sort of self-indulgent sort of rock. I mean, I can go back now and listen to it and really enjoy it. You know, I can enjoy Yes. I can enjoy, you know, Jethro Tull. I can enjoy a lot of the bands that were around. But for us, we were fans of something that was a little more, for want of a better way of putting it, a little more AC/DC.
AC/DC lands in England in 1976, height of the punk scene.
No punk would be seen dead at a Led Zeppelin gig or a Deep Purple show. They all came to ours.
They had the energy of a punk band, but they were definitely a rock and roll band.
They're playing this raw rock and roll, you know, the place is just dripping with sweat, and it's just as powerful, if not more powerful, than all these punk bands that these kids are coming in to see.
Yeah, I saw him at the Nashville in West Kensington, which is a small boozer, you know, like, and he did the carrying Angus round on his shoulders thing, and they went down a storm. I mean, from the day one, they were big in England, you know, they were instant success.
They had the energy of a punk band, and a lot of people called them a punk band, and they they were totally insulted by that, because I brought that up during my interview with them, and they were laughing about it. Malcolm said something like, "Oh yes, punk, magical stuff."
They liked the energy of the kids and all that, but when it came right down to it and AC/DC actually started to see some of these punk bands, they didn't want to have anything to do with it because none of those guys could play.
The main thing about punk was that you weren't trained to use an instrument, you know. If you were, that was like 2 marks away, you know. So you got a lot of very poor bands, consequently, you know.
Like your sheer lack of skill is the message. Well, that's not at all what AC/DC is about. So they tried to distance themselves as much as possible from that.
Because at the end of the day, really all punk was more about aesthetics. It really wasn't about music.
And when they played in England at that time period, they literally, Angus said, influenced the Sex Pistols with Bond's, you know, jean jacket with the arms cut off and the way he was wearing his hair and everything. And after they were playing there for a while, audience members started showing up dressing, you know, like the band. So they did make their imprint over there.
When you're in a band, your ambitions change. Like, as you cross one ridge, another one shows up through the fog, you know, and you have to get up that one. So first you wanted to get paid, and then you get paid, and then you wanted to get paid more, and then you wanted to play bigger places, and then you wanted to play the Marquee, then you wanted a residency at the Marquee, and you got that, then you wanted to play Hammersmith, and da-da-da-da-da-da, you know, and you're still going. There's always another mountain to climb.
Yeah, it took them a while. They did start out playing at the Red Cow in London, and then they finally worked their way up to playing the Marquee. And pretty soon they packed in over 1,000 people into the club every time they played. They had people waiting in line to get in, and they took England by storm, definitely.
I think we were really influenced by seeing how AC/DC did that. And it was just mayhem. I mean, you know, I've never, ever experienced an audience just going completely bonkers like that, you know. And we were like, well, we want to do that.
By the time the band filmed Let There Be Rock in '79 in Paris, the band was selling out all over. Their shows were sellouts, and the airplay was, you know, Highway to Hell was coming up the charts, and they were really at their pinnacle with Bon.
There was no big show back then. They didn't have any big pyro, and they didn't have the big Rosie, and they didn't have any of that. You just had 5 dudes on stage. And then it was all, you know, it was all about Angus and Bon. It was just those 2 guys' personalities were so massive that they were already, you know, reaching every person from the front to the back. It was just undeniable. You couldn't go to that show and not just be, you know, mesmerized by the 2 of them.
Opening up for AC/DC, it wasn't just the fact that you were opening up for them. It was like you get probably the best seat in the house every night. You get to stand on the side of the stage, and it was like a lesson in how to do it every single night. Every single night, without fail, they delivered. You know, there was never any question.
AC/DC with Bon Scott was such an intact unit, and they were so good. And they were just starting to really crest in their popularity.
When Bon died, and everybody said, oh my God, what's going to happen? But it was, you know, it was different than Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin, when Bonzo passed away, right away I heard, they'll never replace him, it's over, that's that.
Who knows what's going to happen with AC/DC at that point? Oh, well, just happened to go and record one of the biggest albums of all time. It's a pretty crazy story.
With AC/DC, when Bon Scott passed away, I heard no, we're going to go on. We're going to find another great singer. And sure enough, man, I mean, I didn't think they could ever beat it, but they did. I mean, Brian Johnson is incredible.
Maybe had the same spirit as them. And so in that way, they were able to replace Bon by getting somebody who was in line with the spiritual essence of what they were, as opposed to trying to sort of just say, we need somebody who sings like Bon.
He's like a big kid in the candy store, literally. I mean, and the thing that they love so much about Brian is, you know, they were in shock when they were auditioning people, and Brian came in and made them laugh.
And maybe that was the genius of what they did. They just went with their instincts.
When they called Brian to audition for the band, Brian thought it was a horrible joke and hung up on the first call. He thought it wasn't funny, and then when he did go to London and audition, he fit the band so perfectly, and that's what's so remarkable about Brian, not only being able to, you know, to carry the torch for Bon and sing his songs and the new songs that Brian helped write, but Brian is so much like Bon.
You know, Brian Johnson has said that when he was, you know, hired on and was trying to write lyrics and nothing was coming to him, he really did have a few moments where he felt Bon was in the room, where all of a sudden, you know, the lyrics to Hell's Bells came flowing out of him. He was like drinking some whiskey and boom, song was done. And that's kind of the way this record really went.
Brian sings on Back in Black and he wrote the lyrics, but Bon is all over the album.
They had the music already written. So in a weird kind of way, Bon was very much part of that album, even though he wasn't there.
Knowing what I know of Bon as a fan, I think he'd be pretty proud with what the band did after his death, and clearly happy and prideful of what he contributed as the blueprint for AC/DC.
They were finally getting to where he always dreamed he would be, and dying right before Back in Black was recorded, I think he definitely went out on top. There'll never be another Bon Scott, that's for sure.
I think the band did the right thing by continuing, and they had Back in Black with Brian, and God bless Brian. I mean, the guy sang for the band for 30 years now. Balls of steel.
He has really carried the torch for Bon and the overall global powerhouse name of AC/DC with great pride and great excellence. And, you know, he said, talks like this. He goes, Lonnie, happy birthday, man. Here's your birthday. He's a real good Scotsman.
I remember hearing Back in Black on the bus, and we all just looked at each other and went, this is insane. This is the best thing we've ever heard. And then to be asked to open for them again, but with Jonna singing was the ultimate. I mean, that was fantastic.
The remarkable thing about the album Back in Black, the album that almost didn't get made, is now it is the second biggest selling album next to Michael Jackson's Thriller in history.
It really is an interesting passage in time, and maybe that's why it's a standalone record, because it really was, in many ways, about 6 people.
The biggest thing about AC/DC throughout their entire career, even to this day when they're one of the biggest bands on the globe, to me, is they're relatable. They are like their fans. They never put themselves out there in a way that's you can't connect with.
Gene Simmons said, never trust a great-looking band.
Kiss, for an example, the band was this larger-than-life entity. AC/DC's connection came more from the standpoint of like, hey, that's one of us. Those are people like us. They look like us. They act like us. They talk like us. They're one of us.
It's always been really very real, very authentic. It's never been something that's like, they've never looked at a marketing plan. They've never looked at this. They've never looked at trends. You know, screw trends. I mean, like, you know, you just do what you do.
They did it, of course, through tremendous records and songs and riffs and all that. But underneath all that, there was just this communal experience that continues to this day.
AC/DC is so skilled at sort of doing lowbrow in a very highbrow way, which is why they have such a mass appeal. If they were only sort of decently good at what they did, they would be nothing more than a club act or something at this point. The fact that they're a stadium-level band says that everybody gets the joke.
They laugh at themselves. Angus dresses up as a schoolboy. all their songs are very uplifting and, you know, have a good time. And, you know, you're not going to get any big political message from them in their music. And Angus once said, you know, you're never going to hear a ballad out of us.
They've never listened to, you know, A&R guys who've told them that you need to write a love song. I think the most romantic song they have is like "You Shook Me All Night Long." You know, there aren't too many ballads. There's you know, other members haven't done solo projects. They've just really stuck to their guns, done it their way, come hell or high water.
And there's no reason to change anything. I mean, when you listen to their stuff, I can't imagine anybody wanting to even tweak it slightly. It was perfect from day one.
You know, Angus was once responding to a journalist who said, you know, you've made 12 albums that sound exactly the same. And, you know, Angus took a minute and he said, no, you've got it all wrong. We've made 13 albums that sound exactly the same.
You never saw them try to run the grunge wave. You never saw them try to do rap rock. They've always been AC/DC from the beginning to present. No matter what's been going on, they've always been true to what they do.
That's what's so great about the band, is you can't typecast them. Well, was AC/DC, what kind of band were they? Well, they were AC/DC. What kind of band are they? Well, they're AC/DC. Now, really, think about the history of rock. How many bands can you just say that their name defines their genre? That's pretty significant right there.
Has started out pretty much from the first record and sounded like they sound now. You know, and it's not that they can only do one thing, and it's not that they never got better, it's that they were always that good.
From the moment I, you know, picked up a pair of drumsticks, they were it. They were such a big part of, you know, what I do today. You know, they started it all, really.
If it wasn't for Malcolm and Angus, I'm not sitting here in this chair talking to you guys about AC/DC, because I never would have started a band. I wouldn't have become the guitar player I became. Who knows what I would have gone on and done with my life, but I certainly wouldn't have started Anthrax and had this as my career and my world and my life if it wasn't for Malcolm and Angus. So, I mean, I know that's a lot of shit to hang on somebody, but it's true. I mean, they are directly responsible for my career and the world I live in.
AC/DC are one of the best things that ever happened to rock and roll. Without them, it would have been a very much normal place, and that's not what rock and roll should be about. Live forever, boys. Do what the fuck you like. I'll be behind you.
Kind of says it, doesn't it? It's like the title says it all. Like, end of story. You know, it's like, let there be rock.